In today's program, I want to talk about George Lamsa. We're approaching the 50th anniversary of his passing away. And George Mamashu Lamsa was an Assyrian who immigrated to the United States of America, and he translated the Bible from Aramaic, and he was an Assyrian-American Aramaic Bible translator and commentator. So he did a lot of significant things, but then there's a little bit of controversy about George Lamsa as well. But I think if you look at George Lamsa, he made a lot of important contributions in encouraging the study of Aramaic, but also increasing knowledge of who the Assyrian people are. So it's creating awareness of the Assyrian national identity and Assyrian Christian cultural heritage, and also encouraging the study of the scriptures and understanding of Christianity from the perspective of the Aramaic language.
Jesus was an Aramaic-speaking Jew of the Middle East, and the Assyrians are Aramaic-speaking Christians in the Middle East who have endured persecution for over 1,000 years. Join Voice of the Word Aramaic Bible teacher, artist, and author Stephen Missick as he examines the Bible through the ancient languages, peoples, lands, cultures, and times in which it was first revealed. Research the scriptures, rescue persecuted Christians, and restore the church to its Semitic roots. And now, Voice of the Word.
All right, I want to talk about George Lamsa real quick, give some quick observations about his life. And George Lamsa has been very influential. So George Lamsa, he was born in Marbishu in the Ottoman Empire, where these communities where he was from, the Hakkari region, they had ethnic cleansing of Assyrians during the time of World War I. But he was born in 1892, and he died on September 22nd, 1975. Born in Marbishu in the extreme east of Syria. Native Aramaic speaker. He translated the Aramaic Peshitta Old New Testament into English. And let's look at what he's kind of controversial for. Now, the Aramaic Bible, you have the Old Syriac and the Syriac Peshitta. This is a very ancient version of the Bible, and it's an important witness to the text of Scripture. So Syriac is an important language that is important to study ancient manuscripts of the Bible. So if you get like the scholarly reconstruction, the Nestle-Ullin text of the Greek New Testament, they're looking at all the texts of the Bible, and they consult with the Aramaic text as well, especially the Old Syriac. And any modern translation of the Bible, if you look at the footnotes, they constantly, especially in the Old Testament, they will refer to the Syriac Old Testament, and sometimes even the New Testament, they'll allude to references from the Aramaic. Not too much, really, but you'd have to get, like, if you get the scholarly reconstruction of the Greek text, they are going to have footnotes where they allude to the Aramaic. But the Aramaic Bible is the oldest translation of the Bible into any language. Of course, you have the Greek Septuagint. We're talking about the New Testament. The oldest translation of the New Testament in any language is the Aramaic. Now, here's the issue. George Lamsa is a Aramaic primacist, a Syriac Peshitta primacist. And this is kind of a perspective not held by the scholarly community. The scholarly community believes that, yes, Jesus spoke Aramaic. I think that's pretty evident from the Greek New Testament, where we have all kinds of Aramaic words used in the Greek New Testament. But they believe that there were Aramaic traditions, Aramaic oral traditions, because the original preaching of Jesus, the apostles, is in Aramaic. Then it's translated into Greek. And one of the source texts of the New Testament, for the Gospels, is called the Q document, which means the source documents. And scholars believe that document was written in Greek. Now, there are some scholars like Maurice Casey, he's passed away, and he speculates, and some scholars speculate, that there were Aramaic Gospels that were circulating. This isn't just a hypothesis. What Casey was trying to do is trying to reconstruct. He wrote these books, Aramaic sources for Mark's Gospel, Aramaic sources for Q, where Maurice Casey is trying to reconstruct, based on using the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Syriac writings. He's trying to reconstruct original written Gospels in Aramaic, theoretically. Now, the Church Fathers in Caesarea, there was a Aramaic, they call it the Hebrew Gospel, but the Church Fathers are very specific that Hebrew Gospel is in Aramaic. We don't have access. There's like quotations and references to it. Sometimes they refer to a word or two. But the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew it's lost unless there's some kind of discovery somewhere where it's rediscovered. We don't have it anymore. The Church Fathers had access to it. It was at Caesarea, and they might have been other copies around the Middle East. Like I said, who knows? Maybe one will turn up. But as of now, we don't have an Aramaic. What we do have is we have translations of the Bible back from Greek back into Aramaic. This is scholarly, the scholarly consensus, where you have the Christian Palestinian Aramaic gospel fragments. But much earlier than that is the Old Syriac and then the Syriac Peshitta New Testament. So these are and Syriac would be close to how Jesus would have spoken. It's contemporary dialect with the Aramaic of Jesus, but technically you have Eastern and Western Aramaic. Jesus would have spoken Western Aramaic, and these are Eastern, but very, very similar. So the Syriac Peshitta is a very valuable tool in reconstructing Aramaic and the words of Jesus in his original language. So Aramaic is very important, but scholars believe the New Testament, you can speculate about like maybe the book of Revelations, maybe James is written in good Greek. What about Jude? Could there have been Aramaic sources for these books? Possibly, but like I said, we don't have them. And the only thing that we're for sure about is that there was an Aramaic version of the Gospel of Matthew that was circulating, that the Muslims probably burn up when they conquered Caesarea. So the Aramaic Gospels we have now, scholars believe, are translations from the Greek back into the Aramaic, right? Jesus spoke Aramaic, the Gospels written in Greek. We did have Aramaic Gospels that are lost. So the Gospels that we do have in Aramaic, they're very valuable and important to help us reconstruct and to hear the words of Jesus in his own language. I'm not discounting or minimizing the importance of these Aramaic versions of the Gospels at all. They're very important. But scholars would look at George Lamsa and say that, yes, we acknowledge, the scholarly community, we acknowledge that the Syriac Bible is a very important witness to the text of the New Testament, and also it can help us see, hear the gospel in Jesus' own language. So scholars don't deny the importance of the text of the Syriac Peshitta as a witness to the ancient text. It's part of the textual evidence of the New Testament. And I think scholars would concede it's like Jesus spoke Aramaic. This is a Bible in Aramaic. It can help you reconnect with how Jesus actually spoke. It's translated back into his original language. Scholars don't dispute that. But what George Lamsa says is that no. The Syriac Peshitta is the original. We know that Jesus and his apostles spoke Aramaic. This is the Aramaic Bible. And in fact, this is the original Aramaic Bible. This is it. This is not the words of Jesus translated from Greek back into Aramaic. No, this is the actual, authentic, original words of Jesus. And the scholarly community does not believe in that. But, so I don't necessarily agree with everything that George Lamsa says. Now, plus, he did a translation of the Old New Testament, but it's a idiosyncratic translation, right? It's like his own version of the Bible, translated by one person. Now, a scholarly, George Carraz is spearheading the Antioch Bible translation of, they finished the New Testament, and George Lamsa would say, I'm the first one translating the Bible from Aramaic into English. But the King James authors, if you read their original introduction, they say, the King James translators say, we consulted the Syriac. So the Syriac Bible was known, and the translators, the King James, they did not translate from the Syriac, they translated from the Greek. But they referenced it, they looked at it, they claimed they consulted, they had the Syriac Bible, and they referenced it in their translation. that's what you get the introduction to the King James Bible. That's what they say. So the Syriac Peshitta was known and was even consulted by the King James Bible translators. But a direct translation, we have John Wesley Etheridge in the 1800s, and then James Murdoch. So we have two translations of the Syriac Bible. So George Lamsa is like a third, and those are two very good translations. And the Etheridge translation, John Wesley Etheridge decided to use Aramaic, I guess Assyrian pronunciations for the name Jesus, or the names of all the apostles, the place names, so the Aramaic sounds come through more, right? So Jerusalem instead of Jerusalem is how it's spoken in Aramaic. So you actually get a feeling by using Aramaic pronunciations as much as possible. With the John Wesley Etheridge translation, you hear the voice of the original Aramaic comes through more than just translating it into King James English the way James Murdoch did. So is very popular. So George Lamsa translated the Bible into Aramaic. It actually became a very best-selling, very popular translation of the Bible. And he called it the New Testament, or the whole Bible, the Holy Bible according to the Eastern text. So he's actually putting the translation from the Aramaic out there, and in his introduction, he's introducing people to the Assyrian people. And George Lamsa then writes Bible commentaries on the Old and New Testament. Now, in my opinion, he's aiming at a popular audience. They're very engaging and interesting, and he brings a lot of anecdotes of what it was like. Because his idea was, he goes, I grew up speaking Aramaic, and he says, our way of life as I grew up wasn't, and there's probably some truth to this, it wasn't really all that much different from how Jesus and the prophets of old lived. In our village, life is simple and plain, and a lot of technological innovations kind of left us behind, and we're living like people did in Bible days. So it says, I grew up, this is what George Lamsa is saying, living like King David or Jesus himself, that the shepherds and all these, these parables Jesus gives about agricultural life, that was just real normal daily life for me. It's not like I'm reading about ancient history. This is how I grew up. A life not much different from the time of Jesus and the time of the prophets that were before him. There's probably some truth to that. But looking at his writings, George Lamsa never studied Greek. So sometimes in Syriac, you have Greek loan words. So he mentions a word in the Syriac, and it's like, well, that's actually a Greek word that made its way into Syriac, that he doesn't mention that in his writings. The other thing about George Lamsa that I kind of have, well, first off, he's saying that scholars don't agree with him, that the entire Syriac Bible, especially the New Testament, is the original, that the Greek is derived from the Syriac Peshitta, not the other way around. And most scholars don't agree with that. And then, for some reason, George Lamsa associated with Unitarian Universalists and the Unity School of Christianity. And these are non-Orthodox, non-Trinitarian Christians. He also met with the Way International, which is a derivative of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And they actually produced I got it right here. I'll show you this. You see here, George Lamsa helped them make this. And what you have here is George Lamsa came and talked about Aramaic, and I'm really impressed with this. So here you have the Aramaic script. They put a lexicon code, a number where you can look in the dictionary every single Aramaic word. And then we have the King James Bible right here, and then we have a word-for-word translation there, the Way International's translation of. But George Lamsa was instrumental in the the creation of this Aramaic English interlinear New Testament. And this is the Four Gospels in Volume 1. It's very impressive work. Now, Jan McGuire, I don't know if she met him herself, but she produced this. She also has an interlinear Bible. This is the Light of the World Ministries, and this is her translation of the New Testament from the Aramaic. So she probably worked in the creation of these. I met her a couple of times. I haven't seen her in a long time, but my background is Baptist. I have a theological education. I have a doctorate in theology. So to me, orthodoxy is very important, especially doctrine is very important. And I think the scriptures teach the divine Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And I'm conservative, so I look at these groups like the Unity Church of Christianity and Unitarian Universalists as being outside of traditional Christian orthodoxy. And I want to be a champion of orthodoxy, so I have an issue with that. And I don't understand why George Lamsa was associating with these people, but it's liberalism. And liberalism today is much different than it was in the mid-20th century when he's engaging with these people. And these are very, I think we see it around that time period. Of course, you had this terrible genocide in 1915, but it seemed like the power of Islam, radical Islam, after the Ottoman Empire was defeated, and they actually had the caliph. He was deposed. So there's no more Muslim caliph anymore. And you actually had the rise of Arab nationalism. Now the Wahhabis, which are a radical sect, took over Saudi Arabia, but the greater Islamic world, instead of seeing this Islamic militancy we see today, you had more secularism and Turkish nationalism. Ataturk wasn't really pushing hardcore Islam. And you had this, around this time, you had the Baha'i religion, which is kind of, a universalist, kind of Unitarian, all roads lead to God. And look at Khalil Gibran, the guy that wrote The Prophet. He's coming from Lebanon, and he's got all these liberal people in America, because Khalil Gibran comes from Lebanon, and he wrote The Prophet, and he also wrote a book on Jesus called The Son of Man, and he's teaching mysticism. So what they're trying to look at, the liberals are looking at the Middle East and the East as bringing Eastern mysticism. So they're trying to look at Jesus as an Eastern mystic. And that's why they're attracted to George Lamsa. Maybe George Lamsa is, he's catering to his audience, perhaps. He's trying to put out this message. But I think that there's also some positive things that George Lamsa did in, number one, popularizing Aramaic. And I got his New Testament origin. I think it's written like a doctoral thesis, but there are certain contentions he makes in that. Overall, I like the book. There's a few issues. If I was in his doctoral committee, I would have rejected the New Testament origin. And I would say, okay, I want you to correct, 3 or 4 pages out here. Some of the contentions you make, I think, don't represent scholarly consensus. Perhaps you can reword it, or, but if he revised that, I think he should have earned a doctorate on that book. It just has some things I think that don't represent scholarly consensus. It's got a lot of good information in it. Of course, my library is in disarray. I was trying to find his New Testament origin today, and I couldn't find it. Somebody should go through it and revise it and take all the errors out of it. And I think so. Anyway, what I'm saying is there's value to his work, but for some reason he started finding an appeal among these leftist groups like the Unity Church of Christianity. So he met with non-Trinitarian so-called Christians and in the Way International, which is an offshoot of Jehovah's Witnesses. And then, like I said, Unity Church of Christianity. He met Errico Rocco, this Italian man, became George Lamsa's disciple. And Errico Rocco met him. I should have been more polite than I was. It's like, look, I had some Assyrian Christians with me. And it says, we understand that, you're teaching all this like Eastern mysticism, but the Assyrian Church of the East is based on the Nicene Creed understanding of Christianity, right? We're not some kind of, the Assyrian Church of the East isn't some kind of a Eastern mystical aberration or deviant or distinct different manifestation or expression of Christianity. They affirm the New Testament, the doctrines we believe. And I've been reading the Aramaic. It's in Aramaic, the language of Jesus, but it doesn't say something different in the Aramaic. It's what we believe. When the understanding of this is a translation. Yes, you can understand it. It's the same thing for the most part. Yeah, sometimes nuances and things don't carry over, but it's the same message. I mean, what would that mean where, if the gospel really was lost in translation? It's not. The essentials of the gospels, the essence of the gospel has been communicated in English. And the translation by Lamsa and these other people, and I would trust the George Carraw's Antioch New Testament more than, because instead of one person's unique perspective, you have recognized scholars working on that translation. So it's good to look at different translations instead of just going by. And then we have Neil Douglas Klutz, who is also inspired by George Lamsa, and he's getting into Eastern mysticism. And sometimes they use some of the Aramaic for like transcendental meditation purposes. Hey, I don't know, there could be some value in that. But me, I want to affirm traditional understanding, the teachings of Yeshua the Messiah, Jesus the Messiah, and his apostles, his holy apostles. In the Assyrian tradition, that's Thomas, Thaddeus, and Marmari. And but another thing that George Lamsa did is, I met Kasha Klutz when I've told the story about how I got interested in the Assyrian Christian heritage. So I met Kasha Klutz, and Kasha was telling me about there's a group of like 7 to 10 Americans who joined the Assyrian Church of the East, and several of them, for a while anyway, as Kasha Klutz, they were ordained as Americans. So Americans were joining the Assyrian Church of the East under Mar Shamoun. And I guess Mar Shamoun, I believe he was assassinated in 1975. So Mar Shamoun and George Lamsa died in the same year. I might give a teaching soon about Mar Shamoun as well, and he's been unfairly denigrated, and he played an important role. And I think he's kind of I'm sure everybody makes mistakes. I'm sure he made his share as well, but he's kind of a victim of history, a victim of very negative circumstance and situations beyond his control. Of course, like I said, we all make mistakes, but 50 years ago. So George Lamsa, I think he was the first Assyrian American to really create awareness and interest in studying the Bible from an Aramaic perspective. There's value in that. Some of his theories might be too extreme, but the gist of it's correct. He got people into the Bible. I've heard there's recordings of him, and I think there's also some video recordings of him and his work, but we have his Bible and his commentaries, and I do think they have their value. However, this is like he did receive some criticism. There's this Christian Research Institute, and they did they wrote an article on him. What year was this? In Christian Research Journal. Looks like it's 1980s. It says George M. Lamsa, Christian scholar or cultic torchbearer. But what they do in that article is whoever wrote it didn't understand. He calls it Aramaic, Armenian, which is a totally different language. It's not even a Semitic language. But I think that article, George Lamsa, Bible scholar or cultic torchbearer, does have some valid points. So I have some issues. I don't agree with all of George Lamsa's conclusions, but on the other hand, he was an innovator in kind of creating the field of Aramaic studies in America. I mean, making that Bible is important, and people actually reading a translation from the Syriac Peshitta, and creating Bible commentaries where he's got information gleaned from his experience as a native Aramaic speaker and as an Assyrian Christian, bringing insights from that perspective. I think there's value on that. But his disciples took it further than he did. Like Neil Douglas Klutz is like, you got straight up New Age, where Jesus is like a ascended master, not the traditional Jesus is understood through the New Testament, the Bible, but a New Age ascended master. And that's just, he's drawing that from, but George Lamsa himself kind of encouraged that in a sense, not directly, but by affiliating with Unitarians. But an innovative and influential Assyrian American, like I said, even today, it's like, what's an Assyrian? People don't even know. For somebody, and the those people who came into, like Kasha Klutz, he didn't really talk about George Lamsa when I met him several times. He's a good man. But I am sure that George Lamsa had an influence on these people learning about the Church of the East and then becoming so interested in it, where you had several Americans who joined. I saw this picture of I saw this picture of Mar Shamoun, actually. And it's Mar Shamoun sitting around Kasha Klutz, Kasha Burney, and like I said, there's at least 5 more. I don't know what happened to that picture. The bad thing is, Mar Shamoun blinked. That's why you got to take multiple photographs. It's like it probably wouldn't matter if some of the other priests blinked, but the Patriarch Catholicos himself had his eyes closed in the picture, and then somebody tried to draw his eyes open on it. It's like, oh, it looks so stupid now. He should have just left it with his eyes closed. But that shows the influence. So what I'm saying is, George Lamsa, for some of his errors, he made a lot of positive contributions. And when I started learning about Aramaic from F.F. Bruce, but then, then you come across, when you're doing this, researching this, you're going to come, back then, things are different now. So I came across George Lamsa in some of his writings, but I don't know, I was already leaning towards conservative and traditionalist. He's not writing, like I said, scholars kind of dismiss some of his conclusions, but he's not writing at a scholarly level, except for his New Testament origin. And there's a lot of things I like about his New Testament origin, but then there's certain claims he makes I think are a little bit sensational. And I needed to reread that book, and I like I said, we had a hurricane, a tree fell through my library, and very few of my books are actually damaged, but the library is in disarray. So, noting criticisms and certain reservations, in the end, George Lamsa should be acknowledged and recognized for being a notable and important Assyrian Christian and making important contributions to Aramaic biblical studies and to creating awareness of the Assyrian Christian national identity and Assyrian Christian heritage. So he's a very pivotal person in the mid-20th century, a very important Assyrian American. So even though some of his scholarship has flaws and has led people to make, unwarranted conclusions or going off in different directions, which I think are unwarranted, I think overall his work is very, very important. And acknowledging some of his mistakes and errors, I think we should have to concede that he really did a lot. He's an important Assyrian American. He did a lot to encourage the Aramaic, study the Aramaic Bible and study the Bible with the Aramaic perspective, but also to create awareness of the Assyrian people and who they were. And he actually brought people into the Assyrian church. Obviously, I'm really. Why else would Kasha Klutz? It must have been through George Lamsa. How else could Kasha Klutz and other people become aware of the Assyrian people and so interested that they joined the church? And Kasha Klutz played a very important role for a long time in serving the needs of the Assyrian community, especially in Chicago, where I met him several times. So, George Lamsa, 50 years ago, and soon, before the year's over, I want to talk about Mar Shamoun Ishay and his role, and because we're getting the 50th anniversary from his untimely death as well. So thank you. God bless you. Join us for upcoming episodes of Voice of the Word.
Research, rescue, and restore. Help Voice of the Word and Aramaic Christian Ministries mission research the ancient languages, peoples, lands, cultures, and times of the Bible. Rescue persecuted Assyrian Christians in the Middle East and restore Christianity to its original Semitic roots. For Stephen Missick's books, online giving, and other resources from Aramaic Christian Ministries, visit www.stephenmissick.com. Join us next time on Voice of the Word as we research the Scriptures, rescue persecuted Christians, and restore the church to its Semitic roots.